Thanks to Lisa and Selena from the library for putting this together, and thanks, yeah, they've done a great job. Beautiful posters all around town, and to Ed for opening up the mic for us tonight. And also thanks to Ed for letting us have our Open Hoot Poetry Night, the third Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. We have open mic poetry here at the Down Home, and we're just delighted with this as our venue. Some of our ETSU students, I teach poetry classes at ETSU, and some of our students come out and read, and people from the community. It's just a great mix of people, and we love this venue, so thank you, Ed. We got 3 books of poems, and I'm not going to read all of them to you. I'm just going to do a little bit of a sample. I thought I'd start with one about, this poem's got rock and roll, fast cars, and really bad driving, and really incompetent driving in it. So I thought I'd open with this one called Detroit Muscle. I cranked the Camaro by sparking 2 ignition wires, and the engine rumbled like a death foretold. Billy Thatcher rebuilt it with Knoxville Motor Speedway in mind, and got as far as an Edelbrock Torker intake, Holly 4 barrels, and a pistol grip gear shifter before his money ran out, and he sold it to my dad. For a full year, I passed it twice a day on the school bus, marking its progress from a primered shell on cinder blocks beside Thatcher's garage to something like a balled fist on wheels. A '69 rally sport, the very spirit of Detroit labor. I had glued together its exact replica on my bedroom floor. We spent a summer tuning up the 350 until it hummed, and my uncle painted it the blue of a thunderstorm at dusk. The car sounded like lightning striking when I pulled out onto the highway. It could lay streaks on the blacktop all through first gear and catch it again hitting second. I opened it up one day on a gravel road in Sharp's Chapel, windows down, Statesboro Blues by the Allman Brothers blasting from the stereo, and I lost it. The front tire slipped the road, and I went spinning. One ditch swallowed me up and spit me straight into the other, and I landed upside down in a tobacco field, wondering where the road went and why I wasn't on it. It occurred to me I'm going to have to put a muskrat or 2 in some of my poems. I'm probably not going to eat one, but that's the funniest thing I've ever heard, so I need to write a muskrat.
Don't knock until you try.
All right. I could try that, yeah. I'm an adventurous sort. I got invited back to my high school to speak at an honors banquet, which of course I was never an honors student in high school. It was a little bit of an irony for me, but I liked doing that, and I thought, I should write a poem, sort of in honor of the occasion, and actually I wrote this poem, and I thought, wow, yeah, okay, I'm going to keep this one. And it's about a class that some of you might remember taking if you grew up in Tennessee. I grew up just north of Knoxville, in a little community. I mentioned it in that last poem called Sharp's Chapel. It's in Union County. And I remember in 5th or 6th grade we had Tennessee history class. And of course I didn't love it then, but I love now that I remember some of this stuff. So this poem is in honor of that class and my high school. It's called Tennessee History. Purple iris flower and the full-throated mockingbird. The names of our 3 distant presidents, and eventually all 95 state counties. I learned the cash crops, the first governor, the course of every river that flows through, and where to find the lost state of Franklin. Heroes were known by a single word: Boone, Crockett, Houston, Jackson, York. I've taken on all their names, worn their accomplishments like buttons on a shirt, imagined their battles and adventures, played them out as a child over the trails behind my house. I spent a whole summer searching for arrowheads, any sign of the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Creek. I brought the past inside me, carried it everywhere I've been, rode with it across the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, coursing my blood beneath tamaracks in the Vermont woods. It guided me between gravestones of Taylor's Grove Church, the learning deeper in me than soiled in the tread of my shoes. There are many ways to study Tennessee history. One of them is to sit on Malcolm Walker's front porch as late afternoon unspools across his yard. And the hills of John Jess Lay Holler rise up around us. Listen as the soft cadences of his 91-year-old voice brings forth, "Each day I'll do a golden deed." The song Sawmill Dewey Ellis sang at Rubel Johnson's funeral, my great-uncle who died when my grandmother was a girl of 16. History lives in the songs, stories held within the earth, most of it never written down, the truest part stored deep in the boards of old houses, in the split rails of 100-year-old fences, etched in the grain of hand-cut wood. What a great night this has been. Thank you all for staying. I get to open for the Brother Boys. How cool is that? Check that off my list. Poets don't get to do that all the time. Also got to learn that Rita Sims Quillen sings like Loretta Lynn. That was amazing. That was great. I've loved Rita's poetry for years and years, and it's great to hear her sing. I'm going to do a poem from my most recent book called Spectre Mountain. It's not a real place. It's kind of an imagined, it's kind of a fantasia of the imagination kind of poem that I collaborated with my poetry soulmate William Wright down in Georgia. We wrote these poems back and forth, and we do this. We write together a lot. He's my writing buddy, and we've edited books together, and we've done a whole bunch of things. And he said, "I've got an idea," and he said, "You're not going to like it, but we should do it anyway." He's like, "We're gonna write a book together. We're gonna collaborate on a book, poetry book." And I said, "Well, actually, I do like that, but how do we do it?" And he's like, "Well, I'll write one, and you write one, and I'll write one, and you write one." And we wrote this book that way. It took us not very long to write it, but 3 years to edit it and put it together. Yeah, so that's where the artistry is, I think. And for writers know this, that the first draft is like, "Oh yeah, here's something. I got this," and then the revising is the real art of it. So here's one of my poems from this book. We don't really indicate who wrote which poem. We decided we just kind of liked letting it sort of rest that way. But I'll read one that's sort of a little folk tale about where I grew up in Sharps Chapel. The title of the poem it's maybe hard to hear this, hard to catch it when you just hear it one time, but the title of the poem is Pitch. And I wanted to catch like the sound, the pitch that a sound makes, and also the color. One of the phrases I grew up hearing was "black as pitch," and some of y'all might recognize that phrase. So that's the title of this poem, Pitch. The cabin I seek leans against a tulip poplar, half fallen and windowless, doorless, twice as old as the tree, last lived in almost a century ago by a man named Richard, who married my great aunt, for whom the entire tract of land has been called my whole life, and before, call it the Richard side, steep and runneled with floodwater washouts. Someone cared enough for the cabin at one time to haul it 6 miles on the back of a wagon, protecting it from the river becoming lake that would have swallowed it like a tablet. Salvaged because someone already long dead had been born in one of its shallow rooms, saving the birth spirit from a final immersion. Does anyone remember the screams of the panther when I was small? The human-pitched yowling that seemed to stir up from dreams, except that my eyes were always open when I heard them jar the night. Who else remembers how my brother raced home from the woods after seeing that black streak? Mother cat and her litter were what I imagined, the last of something rare, alive in the hills above my own house. So close to my window, I watched for her breath to steam the glass. Arms locked frozen around my body, muscles tensed against the mattress, waiting, hoping to see her shadow, and hoping not. One morning, a blue and white pickup truck parked along the road bank, and two men I'd never seen before carried rifles into the woods. They were strangers on the Richard side, and I knew what they'd come for, so listened for their shots. But all morning, standing in the yard, I heard nothing. No guns, no cries. After that, dogs barked in the night, the familiar voices of the half-shepherd and the hound, but the screaming never returned, even in dreams, even when I tried to hear it in my mind. It was gone. When I lay with eyes pressed open, envisioning cubs nursing her on the cabin floor, praying to see it just once, that pitch made flesh. I'll read a new one tonight that's not in a book yet. I've got a new book coming out next fall. Mercer University Press is going to publish it. It'll be called Merciful Days. So I hope... This reminds me that our library has been doing some really wonderful literary events. We have poetry here, but so many great writers have come through just in the past few months in the library. So not only do they do these wonderful programs for the community to come out and take classes, they bring writers in from all around the region, and I appreciate that so much. So I'll read a new one. This is a little love poem for springtime. It's called Lisa in the Forest. By creekside, she learned mosses and ferns, which ones grew tall and thin, feathery as frayed linens, and which kept dense like moist fur and thrived close to the ground. She loves to find the maidenhair, whose fronds reach up like the fingers of her childhood hand waving to her from the simplicity of past times. We have walked 1,000 miles on trails and off, with me a step behind, so she keeps a clear view of every star anise, mayapple, Dutchman's breeches, trillium. Every flash of color announces itself to her eye, full spectrum, fanning out like a wild library, each sprig a volume in the catalog of life. Got a little library reference in that one. I'm just going to read one more poem. This is the last poem in my first book called Tennessee Landscape with Blighted Pine. One of my oldest friends designed this book. He's really designed all my books, and he had sent me a couple of things that I really liked, and he said, "But I've got one more, and I think you're really going to like this one." And he sent it to me, and it's got this pocket knife on the cover, and so you'll see that like I never go anywhere without my dad's pocket knife in my pocket. So I think he knew the right image for this book. I might get in trouble for this at school sometime. I don't know. Maybe I should. I don't know if you're allowed to have a pocket knife.
We're armed teachers.
That's right. That's right. I'm an armed teacher. Not very armed, but okay. This last poem I'll read, and it's called Big Elm Point. I sat on the bank until everyone else stopped caring whether we caught any fish. Until it was clear they weren't biting, wouldn't take a red worm if it swam right into their suction cup mouths. My daughter had gone off to line up her horses over the sandstone outcroppings that made such perfect mountains for the animals to struggle across. I wanted in on that game, to be face to face with Chloe's serious eyes, portraying the bravest stallion who leads his herd to safety from lurking wranglers and mountain lions. I wanted to follow my mother and father through the fields toward the old Steiner cemetery lot, study the gravestones over the 19th century bones that tended the land before its two rivers were neutered into this slow cresting lake. I wanted to go examine the weathering trunk of the fallen elm that gave this point its enduring name, Big Elm, pronounced Ellum by everyone I ever heard say it. I wanted to think about why no drunken fishermen had chopped it into firewood and grilled their catch over the ghosts of its resin. To imagine the living tree, to remember the mornings in 3rd grade when I cried because I dreaded Miss Sharp and her gingham dresses. She read this poem. It turns out I never thought she would, but she did. You got to change people's names. My mom's told me this. She needed to know. She's a mean teacher. Her gingham dresses, how I prayed when the school bus brought us into view that her blue Ford LTD wouldn't be parked at the end of Sharp's Chapel Elementary. How one morning my mother took pity on me and drove us past the school to Brantley's Market, where we got a bag of peanuts and 2 Cokes. And she took us to Big Elm Point, where she let me throw rocks into the water until noon. At 9 years old, nothing made me happier than my father bringing home a new lure from White's truck stop at Rafine, Virginia, or for my Uncle Gerald to get home from work and say, "Let's go cast a line before it gets too dark." Late spring evenings arrived like birds landing, and the full span of summer reached out for us, waving like the cattails I tried to catch from the car window as the gravel rolled us past. The hours creeping, sunset alive over the trees, while the years folded up as quickly as notebook paper, drawn thick with pictures of muscle cars and basketball logos, pages folded up and gone, tucked into the pockets of our blue jeans. I wanted to swim back from those castaway days, the wash of the past, and on with the present, but I couldn't take my eyes off the fishing line. The water hardly moved unless I reeled in and split the surface with the floater, looking perfectly still, though moving without cease. Does that sound like water or time? I threw out, reeled in, watched the orange eye staring back at me for 3 solid hours before it finally bounced and raced under. All the other things I could be doing, and I watched. The empty hook glistened back through the water. A pair of Canada geese came jeering over us and splashed down in the opposite cove. The ferry operator packed up his thermos as the elms and poplars spread out their long shadows across the rim of Norris Lake. So much was happening. The evening so alive in its subtle approach that I hardly noticed the second bob of the floater, the fresh and writhing worm casting its ancient spell. But the fish bit hard and raced so that I could hardly lose it this time. All I had to do was hold on until Chloe came with her net and brought him up into the air, a smallmouth bass twice the size of her palm. How beautifully the hook slid out of his lip. How clean he looked in her tentative hands, glittering in the late sun, the hour of Cézanne, hour of golden spilling, the silken arc as she tossed him back toward the rest of his silvery blue life.